Hello, this is Dr. Drake, and we are doing our class tonight called Old Testament Studies. Your book is a survey of the Old Testament by Hale and Walton, and you have the task of writing a reaction paper on the required text using the format as outlined. You know what to do, and also to write a short one-paragraph synopsis of each book of the Old Testament. I started in Bible college 1979. It feels like 1879. And one thing I didn't like about studying the Old Testament back then is we just went through it. Just like you would read the Los Angeles phone book. Just next line, next line. And, on your GPS, you've got two modes you can put it in. You can have just a list of words, right on maple, left on ash, 1 mile on birch, right on Adams. You can just see words, or you can see a map that has a different color arrow. And we all like the map because it makes more sense and you can glance at it quicker. So I have found maps the most helpful, charts the most helpful. You see how things interrelate instead of just going through things in a list form. So anyhow, we're going to do a little bit of listing just because we kind of have to. And I'm going to give you some tips on how you can go through the Old Testament. And as time goes on, you won't feel like, I got it after one time through. But I want to see you come to a place where you say, I understand this. I'm starting to get what God's telling us. And I've got a few tips that's going to help you make that happen. And I just want to tell you, you can learn this. Some of my feedback that I've heard over the years is, one college student came to me, 24 years ago and said, I've been a Christian my whole life, and I'm always lost in the Old Testament. I don't know what century we're in. I don't know who we're talking to. I don't know what this 22-letter long name is with 5 syllables. I don't know why this person's killing this. It's just, I'm lost in a haze constantly. But I want to tell you, you can learn this. I could stand in your kitchen and ask you 2,000 questions about your kitchen. And you'd know the answer to every one of them. You would. Because you just live there, you enjoy it there. I'm inviting you to get into the Old Testament. Just drop your mind in there, enjoy it there. Don't. I saw this book at a Christian bookstore. It said, "Finding God in 3 minutes a day." Don't think like that, or you'll never get it. You've got to get lost in the world of it, and just immerse yourself in the Old Testament, and then you'll see it. But one of the main things to do is to see the interrelations. But we'll start at the beginning just quick, and I'm going to show you a couple things. The things I have are, I had a library of 3,000-something volumes, and after moving it 16 times, I shared it with a seminary. But things like this that you'll find extremely helpful, and my photographer is going to tell me, is that visible? Closer, can you see that? Yeah, get things like this. Have charts like this. So you're not forever saying, well, what book is this? Zephaniah, Zechariah. Is that the same book too? You just get charts like this. They're at the Christian bookstores. CBD.com, Christian Book Distributors. They've got the stuff to help you grow. This is a book I got recently, and this is a publisher in Southern California called Rose Publishing. It's the charts, the maps, the timelines, and I have a doctorate in theology. I have a master's in New Testament. I have a degree in Old Testament. I finished college at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, smoked all the tests, did all great and everything, but I still thought, I don't understand the whole layout yet. These things help you learn the layout. I'm just going to brush this past you quick. And I will urge you to get one of these yourself. It really has made me go, oh, wow, I love this. It shows how things happen in chronological order. The Bible isn't written in chronological order. But this shows you the chronology, and you see, oh, I get it. That's why this is said here, that is said there, and such, but blasting right into Genesis. You know the first line. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Moses wrote that down 2,600 years after that happened. Minimum 2,600 years, not counting the Eden years, and we don't know how many years that was. So it's a minimum 2,600 years after it happened, and the whole world went, are you kidding me? God made the heavens and the earth? I didn't know that. Nobody knew. God tells us stuff so that we'll know it. He tells us that he did it. He tells us how he did it. There isn't a mystery to this. There wasn't some, cosmological Burt Bang or whatever that theory's called. There wasn't, gap morphing evolution, this and that, quasar, quasi, star melting jive. God did it. God did it through his word. And he tells us that he did it through his word so that we can know. He wants us to know where we came from, because we have 4 questions. All of us have 4 questions. What is our origin? What is our meaning? Why are we here? What is morality? What's right and wrong? And where are we headed? Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Those 4 things are answered in the Bible, and people who will not become students of the Scriptures are lost on all 4 of those issues. They don't know where they're from. They don't know why they're here. They claim they don't know right and wrong, and they don't know where they're headed, and it makes you crazy. God created the heavens and the earth. Now, we've got the cosmic story of creation in chapter 1. We've got the personal story of creation in chapter 2. 3 is how it all fell apart, chapter 3. Adam and Eve disobeyed. That black and white. Just don't eat that piece of fruit. But any of you who've got children or worked with groups or schools, everything, getting kids to obey. It's everything. God can't get us to obey. And so people think, well, where did we come from? Well, what's wrong with the world? Those questions are answered right there. And the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, is in verse 1 and 2. Right there at the beginning of it all. So we've got that. And then 4, God says, if you eat the fruit, you'll surely die. In chapter 4, murder begins, and the anguish is in overdrive. And God tells you, I told you this was going to happen. You will surely die. The word for surely is achen, A-K-H-E-N in Hebrew. That's how we spell it in English. And you will surely die. It's the strongest word in the Hebrew language. And so God's telling you, I told you you were going to die if you disobeyed me. And death happens right away in one chapter. We've got the genealogies listed. I mean, it is just wild stuff. People are living 900 plus years. Can you imagine being alive in the 1200s? How old are you? Well, I'm 884. Wow. Social Security kicking in. I mean, good. These people are 900 years old. And it's not some biblical, mythical thing. There are 280 cultures around the world that they had no contact with other cultures until just these last few hundred years of the Industrial Revolution and traveling. And they have stories in their folklore, in their old books, about a time, there used to be a time on earth when men would live 1,000 years. But then there was a boat, and 8 people were on the boat. And then something happened, and it flooded, and then we don't live so long anymore. 280 cultures have that. You can't make that up in unison. So it's, you guys know it's not a myth. But so the flood comes, 6 through 9. And, the giants in the land. Look up giants in the land. Do a search on that. I just saw a photo this week of a skull that's been found where the lobe, not the jaw, the lobe of the skull is this big. Big, like beach ball, medicine ball, whatever that's, a big thing like a beanbag seat. These people had fingers the size of my wrist. It says men of renown. My wife and I saw a fascinating seminar on the pre-flood world. There was brain surgery pre-flood. There was electrolysis, anesthesia. There was flight. There was nuclear technology. You don't hear this, do you? No, it's a little bit too zany, but this is what was going on. It says, but man was completely evil and he needed to be destroyed. So the creation where God separates the land from the water, he reverses all that with the flood again, and it goes back. It's called uncreation, really. And then we, why are there so many languages? That question is answered in Genesis 11. Linguists know that we used to all speak a single language. The old charts and the studies, the Euro, Franco, Hungarian, whatever, pre-Latin, there used to be one language. And linguists who don't believe in God know that. And they say, well, it's split somewhere. And, well, there's the answer right there. Abraham is called in chapter 12. And notice the breakdown of this. We have about 12 chapters dedicated to Abraham. We have about 12 chapters dedicated to Jacob, and about 12 chapters dedicated to Joseph. 2 chapters dedicated to Isaac. What's going on here? The Bible's telling us it's Abraham. Take full notice of this guy. He's very important. Is he sinless? No. The Bible puts that in there, so we don't worship him, but we're to revere him. He's the father of our faith, the founder of our faith. He just believed God. Don't make following God a big calisthenics thing. Just believe God, and you'll be righteous like Abraham. Isaac digs wells, gives them away, gives his birthright away. His eyes go away. He's just sitting in a tent and can't see and can't think too well. And so the Bible just, 2 chapters, he ties together Abraham and Jacob. Jacob is the guy who's Israel. He's got the 12 sons. His 12 sons are the tribes. Joseph, man of tremendous character. And anyhow, you know how Genesis goes. At the end, Jacob dies at the end of the book completely, chapter 15. Joseph dies, and it ties together chapter 1 and 50. I told you this was going to happen. Joseph died, and they put him in a coffin. Jacob died, they put him in a coffin. You're supposed to read that and go, oh my goodness, wow. God, he told us this was going to happen. Genesis is about 2,200 years. 22 centuries in Genesis. Exodus is 82 years. So we have 400 years down in Egypt, 430, and then it's time to call them out. And we have the Exodus. It's the most pivotal event of the entire Old Testament era. In the 4,000 years of the original human history, the Exodus is the great event. And with the symbolism there is God, all of us used to live in bondage. And God saying, I will do anything to get you out of your bondage. That's the big story of Exodus. And they get him out of bondage, and I'd love to spend 8 hours on Exodus, but we've got some more books to keep flying through. Leviticus is a 1-month period, just as fast as it could be written down, it was written down. And if you really look into Leviticus, it is very interesting. Kind of reads like a hotel maid's manual, how to clean the room. Not real interesting. But how do you feel when you go into a hotel room and it's grungy and the towels are sticky and there's ick on the floor and the bed is, what happened here? And they didn't clean it and the tub's not clean and there's splats on the mirror. How do you feel? It's like, oh, come on. How do you feel when you go into a absolutely spanking clean, sparkling room? You love it. It's refreshing. Leviticus says, I want you to live refreshed, not grungy. I want you to live holy unto me and not mixed with darkness. Numbers, 38 years. The spies are sent out. They come back. Oh, I don't know. They're too big. It's too scary. You don't think I can help you conquer? I help you conquer everything else? The biggest army on earth, drowned right behind you. I'm in charge. But what have you done? And they faltered, and they said, well, guess what? You're going to die out here. God had to get them out of Egypt, but they wouldn't get the Egypt out of them. So they had to go. Deuteronomy, kind of like Leviticus, written just quickly. by Moses, and right about then, Moses is dying, and then Joshua has been mentored up. Now, why did Joshua rise into leadership so well? It's because he was mentored so well by Moses. Moses sat in the tent and talked with God. And I'm going to tell you something. You do that, the day will come sooner than you think when the whole world looks at you and says, "You blithering genius. You powerhouse. You awesome human being. You colossal accomplishment, you." Sit and talk with God. Joshua was taught how to talk with God, and so Joshua goes in and goes on a rampage, winning Canaan for God, and it went just amazingly so. Joshua is a 25-year period. He takes over when Moses is gone at 85 years of age, and he lives to be 110. Does all those astounding battles from 85 years of age to 110 years of age. And at 110, he could see, he was strong, he was fast, and his mind was keen, and he was healthy. And pretty impressive. You opt to serve God, He'll cover for you in how you need. What if you find the Exodus very intriguing? I just want to say there is a fascinating video called "Patterns of Evidence: The Exodus." My wife and I know the producer, author, writer. We know the guy, and we know the guy in it, and it's wow, it's amazing. Patterns of Evidence: The Exodus. Just get it. Just see it. After Joshua was gone, it said the country went back into sin early in Judges, and it happened quick. What happened? It says Joshua died, and they fell back into sin. Moses took Joshua into the tent and talked with God. Joshua didn't pass that practice on, taking other people into the tent to talk with God. Our faith has got to be passed on. Origin, meaning, morality, destiny. We've got to pass this on to the next generation. That's why we're alive, to make sure this is passed on. So anyhow, we go into the Judges, and Judges, so Genesis is a 2,200-year period. Exodus is 82 years. Leviticus and Deuteronomy are both about a month, maybe up to a year. And then Numbers is 38 years. So that's the 40 years in the wilderness that totals up. Most of that's Numbers. Joshua's 25, but Judges is 300 years. It is about, now it's on this chart here. If we can zoom in on that chart. Oh boy, I haven't looked at it this way. Joshua is... It's on the top here. Jeremiah's, oh brother. No, left. Let's go left one. There's the I forgot to mention this. I want to say this. I want you to realize that Adam lived long enough. Obviously, he knew Methuselah, and Methuselah knew Noah. Methuselah knew Shem, and Noah, and Adam. Methuselah could pass. Noah and Adam didn't live at the same time, but Methuselah lived long enough to pass on stories from Adam direct to Noah and Shem. That's amazing. They could say, "Oh man, you should have known the world. You should have known the world before the fall. Adam told me all about it." One testimony away. And then we have Shem, who was on the ark, who was born 100 years before the flood, and he lived 500 years after the flood. He lived long enough to know Abraham. Shem could tell Abraham, "Boy, you should have known life before the flood. You should have seen it." We've got just Adam to Methuselah to Shem to Abraham. There's just two testimonies of these guys that knew each other. You follow that? The story of creation has got to get passed on to the man who is the headwaters of our great faith. It's Abraham. And so Abraham could do that. I was just hitting it from another angle. You've got to pass this story on. Anyhow, can we find that Joshua? Where Joshua? Okay, it's a 1500 BC top center. That's boy, I can't. It's so easy for me to show you here, but I don't know where scrolling is. We're gonna let it go. So, Judges are 300 years, and the verse that comes up in this is just, it's utter chaos. It's a horror movie that you wouldn't even want to see most of it. By the way, the movie Samson is coming out. Samson was the last judge, and he judged for 20 years. Amazing movie, spring 2018. We've read all the reviews, and we know some of the people in charge of this thing. It's biblically sound and very good. So Samson did well, best as he could. But the judges were just awful. I mean, gore. I mean, gory stuff. And the problem is people just did whatever they felt. Joshua didn't pass on the faith to these guys. And this is what happens. People revert to paganism right away if they're not taught. And Judges says it over and over again. And you're supposed to read Judges and say, my goodness, getting God out of the picture, we never find the picture. Paganism is wrong. It's anti-human. It creates a culture that is so stifling that nobody wants to live in it. You know, I have missionary friends in Africa, and the Christian villages, I mean, good grief, the bonfires and the roastings and the dinner and the worship and the singing and the dancing and the laughter and the colors. And then you've got these totally tribal, dark witchcraft. And one of my friends came back to one of these villages like 15 years after he first went through there, and they said they didn't want the gospel. He came back 15 years later. The place is a ghost town. Everybody's dead. One person got AIDS, came back, killed the whole village. There was like 8,000 people in this village, all dead. Tumbleweeds and coyotes, hyenas. Paganism doesn't work, and Judges is telling you paganism doesn't work. Keep God in it. Keep the God of Abraham in it. Judges comes into Ruth. You got all this wild activity. I mean, if you're getting into it and reading it for all it's worth, you kind of come to the edge of Judges and you push back in your chair and go, oh man, let me breathe a bit. And then the Ruth story comes up. It's such a delightful love story of a woman who is in the far side of the Jordan, who is widowed, her mother's widowed, her mother's leaving, and she says, well, I gotta go back with you. I don't know, there's nothing here. So she goes back, and she gets taken in by Boaz, and the book, it's a beautiful love story. And I've read it in Hebrew too, and in Hebrew it really, oh man, it comes across as heavier in Hebrew, richer, deeper. The colors are more stark. And you come to the end and it says, oh, by the way, this is King David's great-grandmother. And you're supposed to read Ruth and go, ah. So when you're reading this, don't whip through it. Take it in. Inhale it. Get it all. Ruth ends, and we come into 1 Samuel. The culture hasn't changed. We pause and inhale a bit and get a glass of cool water with Ruth, and it's right back into 1 Samuel and Eli and his horrible sons. Do you know a minister that has some children that make you go, what in the world? You're discipling a congregation. Are you explaining the gospel to your own boys, your kids? Eli wasn't. His boys were absolute scandalous riot heads, and they're doing what they're doing in the temple. And God basically says, I got to get rid of this whole family. And, you know the story, Samuel gets called in, and, Samuel gets called in the night. And when he goes to Eli a third time, Eli, you called me. No, I didn't. Wait a minute. I get what's going on here. God's calling you. Next time he calls you, just say, God, talk to me. God does. Samuel comes in and says, Eli, he's just an 8-year-old. You, as an 8-year-old in 3rd grade, you want to give the dirty lowdown to the priest of the country? You realize what this is like, just shaking like a leaf. What did God tell you, Samuel? Tell me. Or there's going to be blood on the saddle. Tell me. Samuel tells him, why did God work it out this way? Why does God use a child? How else is he going to get through to Eli? There's no way. There's no other way to get through to Eli than to do it this way. I mean, these stories are just fascinating. They're just and let yourself be fascinated. In 1st and 2nd Samuel, we have Samuel, Saul, and David. That's the story of a very godly prophet. And I love that line that it says of Samuel, not one of his words fell to the ground. Would you like to have that in your ministry? Where everything you say is bing, spot on. Boy, I would. But Saul comes along, he's the people's choice. And we know when people get what they want, they often aren't happy. And David is God's choice. He's the farthest out brother. He hasn't been corrupted by the social thing. You know, people think, oh, your children need to get socialized. No, they don't. Not by this culture, they don't. David wasn't socialized by this culture. He was out in the wilderness, tending sheep, practicing his sling. He killed a lion, he killed a bear. I mean, God is with this guy. And they say he was handsome and athletic. You know, you can tell by the way he did what he did. And so he so walked with God, he couldn't even imagine not having a good life, not having victories. So he gets called out. Here's this giant, and he says, you guys are letting this uncircumcised Philistine, I won't tell you what the Hebrew says because it's a little bit rough. You're letting this guy taunt you? David had never heard anyone mock God before, and that made him crazy. He says, fine, I'll go do it. But then sends a stone, probably a little bit smaller than a golf ball, right through the guy's skull. Monotheism hung on that battle. Did you know that? Even secular historians say if David had not dropped that guy, the Philistines would have taken over and the Hebrew nation would have been gone and the message of Abraham. I mean, what hangs on what you do? The gospel hangs on your ability to respond to what God has called you to do. And we see David doing this. And what a life this guy has. You go to Jerusalem now, the burger stand is not called McDonald's, it's called McDavid's. The star on the flag and the money is called the Star of David. And, can you imagine? Jesus giving the honor of David in heaven. And Jesus saying, you know, when I was on earth, they called me Son of David. Way to go, David. Way to go. Do you realize how much God wants to honor you? Just learn how he honors those who obey him and follow what he says and learn what he's written down for us to know. The Psalms. If you don't read the Psalms, you're not walking with God. And David had wives. David killed so many people. You know what David did right? Every time something went wrong, he said, God, what do I do? Every time something went wrong with Saul, he said, I think I'll take a vote. See what the people want. Saul did less sin than David did, but Saul did not turn to God. David did. You can do it too. You have no idea what God's going to do with you if we just act like to be a man after God's own heart. Yeah, David fell, he crashed, he bashed, he suffered, oh my goodness. And he tells his son Solomon, son, follow the commandments. And you read his charge at the end of his life, and it's very impressive. 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. This is getting into the flying spaghetti stuff. I mean, trying to interpret 1st Kings and 1st Chronicles and see how they interrelate can be like going through a car wash in a convertible with the hood down. I mean, I know people they get lost all the time. I know people that have been Christians for 65 years and they can't untangle it. I'll just tell you right here, it's not meant to be so complex. Kings and Chronicles happens at the same time. Kings is addressing the North Kingdom perspective. Chronicles is addressing the Southern Kingdom perspective. So you have, it's sort of like, if you're from the East Coast, Kings is sort of like the New York Post. Sensational, gory, wild, oh my goodness. And Chronicles is like the Wall Street Journal. If you're from the West Coast, Kings is like the LA Times, and Chronicles is like the Orange County Register. It's more conservative. It's a more conservative perspective. So what you have, and you know, the North was totally godless. The South was godless enough to be destroyed 150 years after them. But you have in Chronicles, if you put the stories and read them simultaneously, and that can be done. You can see the reference notes in your Bible. That can be done. You have in the South, you have 22 references to, but seek the Lord. 2 Chronicles 7:14. My people call on my name, I will heal their land. Turn from their wicked ways. You have none of that in the book of Kings. You just have this, OMG, oh my goodness, just horrid stuff. That's Kings and Chronicles. At the end of Chronicles, you have the fall of Jerusalem. It's 586. The north fell in 722 BC. 140, do the math, something years later, the south falls. They lasted a little longer because they were more godly. The temple was there, but you know, godly people can end up being just, you know, the amount of, wife and I have been in Hollywood for a while, and the amount of people that were raised in Christian settings and totally went to Gehenna, that's Greek for hell, went to Gehenna in a go-kart. It's terrible, but it happens. And here's something you can do in your Bible. This is what I've done in mine. You can see how Kings and Chronicles and all the prophets relate. And this is it's a task I did years ago. And tell me, photographer, is that lined up? Where it says, see that? At the end of Kings and at the end of Chronicles, Jerusalem was just ransacked, and we have the book of Lamentations being written by Jeremiah. And I wrote at the end of 2 Chronicles 36, I wrote Lamentations written here. I went to 2 Kings 20, the last in 2 Kings, I wrote Lamentations written here. You can, the references, just write that in, because if you find out where things happen and you see the coincidental literature and events and stories and battles, you'll go, oh, I'm starting to get this. And that's when things get really excited. I think I mentioned this. You know, I had a college student. I was a college pastor in the 1990s, and this one student came to me and says, I'm starting to come out of the fog. I've been a Christian 19 years, and I'm lost all the time. I'm getting out of the fog here. You know, you may know people in your church have been Christians 60, 65 years. Don't even know the books of the Bible. You need to learn this. Otherwise, you know, you'll think Hezekiah is one of the books, and you're doing your devotions in the book of Hesitations. Don't do that. You know, get a systematic thing. And I'll end with telling you how to do that. But so anyhow, they go into captivity in 586. It's the end of 2 Kings. It's the end of 2 Chronicles. And Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther happen during these years of captivity, and the initially coming back. But did you know that Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther didn't happen in that order? Chronologically, Esther happened first, then Ezra happened because they were told to go back and rebuild the kingdom and the temple, and then Nehemiah happened. Write this down, read it, or watch it again and put it in your memos, and just you'll see it in the notes at the beginning of your books in the Bible. But Esther happened in 470 BC. Esther's in 470 BC. Ezra is in 450 BC. Nehemiah was in 430 BC. So it's Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. But the order of how they happened was Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah. That's another big long story. That's grad school question for what happened. So we're just going to go on. So when you start to learn this stuff, it starts to get us, and when you start to see the interrelations, it gets really exciting. We come up to Job. it starts the wisdom literature. Job is so sad, and it's so painful. He's a good man. And the devil walks in with the angels and says, well, let me punish him. He won't be such a good man. Can you imagine that? And you know that God and the devil are in conference about you? Do you know that? Evil wants you. God wants you more. So Job, and it's a difficult book. Does God do this? No, it says the devil tormented him. Doesn't go. When you're suffering, don't think, well, God's this and that in me. That is not God's idea of a good time. God wants to bless you. You read Job, beginning and the end, God wants to bless you. And Job is about a 9-month, 12 months at the most. So if you're suffering, it says in Peter, after you've suffered a little while, the Lord will say to you. Job goes through this stuff too. We don't know when Job was. Job might be a pre-flood book. Did you know a dinosaur is described in full in Job 40? Late in the book. Oh, I should have written that down. It talks about an apatosaurus. Look at it. It says in the thing. It says in some of the margins of the Bibles that are more modern. Oh, we don't want to offend the evolutionists there. Well, this is probably a hippo or an elephant. Look at the tail on a hippo and an elephant. Little tail, this big, and it says he has a tail like a cedar tree. A cedar tree is 5 foot, 7 foot in diameter, tapering down to a tail like a cedar. This is an apatosaurus. They were all over the world before the flood. I don't want to. Yeah, but here's the pattern of Job: Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They each speak 3 times, and Job replies 3 times to each of them. And then God speaks at the end and asks 64 questions that none of us would be able to answer. What a blast. And it says, and when Job prayed for his friends, God restored him. Yeah, I can't believe this Bildad guy, early in the book, he says, well, only sinful people die, so your children must have died. That's why God killed all 10 of them. How do you talk this? I have been to the funeral of a mother who's crying so hard she's bouncing. I mean, I was coming apart myself. What if anybody went there and says, well, little rascal, he had to go. He's just gonna be a bandit all his life, so why not? You can't talk to a grieving. Bildad talks to Job like that. Would you pray for Bildad? Yeah, I'd grab a baseball bat. And Job prays for Bildad. He prays for Eliphaz. He prays for Zophar. And then his fortune is restored all the more, even bigger than he had before. Amazing stuff. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. All 4 of these books were written by David and Solomon. And some of the other Psalms were written by other people. But we've got to be doing our devotions in that. Ronald Reagan read the Psalms and the Proverbs every day. Abraham Lincoln did. George Washington did. You've got to walk with God. You've got to read this stuff. And it's amazing to me, Ecclesiastes, Solomon, richest man that ever lived. Solomon had more wealth than the country of Canada today. That's like, whoa. They said Solomon owned so much gold that if it was all put together, it would be the size of a pickup truck. You couldn't even... The wealth. The whole world came to him. And God, he asked for wisdom. God gave it to him. What are you asking for? Anyhow, we come up to the prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Lamentations, and Ezekiel. The literature here is so glaring. It's so amazing. It's so fantastic. And I kind of planned on showing where it was on the chart. Okay, here we are. I hope you can see this. Is it big enough? Oh, dear. You might do real well to pick this up. I saw it today. It's at cbd.com. It's $30. It's knocked down to $16. This book is my favorite. And I have a doctorate, and I have 3,000 volumes of an expansion of this book. This condenses it, and this is what you need to know. But anyhow, Isaiah, we've got these prophecies about Jesus, and Isaiah is right. Oh, brother, God help me, where was I? There's Isaiah right there. A century later is Jeremiah. He's writing in 760. In 760 BC, the city of Rome is being founded. By the way, Isaiah is one of the greatest writers of all time. In my mind, Isaiah, Luke, and William Shakespeare are the three greatest writers of all time. But Isaiah writes this: Rome is just being founded. The north is going to fall in about 20 years. The whole south will be completely surrounded and taken on and threatened by Assyria and Sennacherib. Isaiah and Hezekiah talk, and they say, God, you've got to get rid of this army. And by the Assyrian army, the most savage people that have ever walked the face of the earth. They make ISIS, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and all these type of people. They make them MS-13. They make all these people look like Sunday school kids that like to play with cotton balls. These people went through like a weed whacker, and the humans were the grass. They cut everybody in half with glee. Played catch with babies and it's so blah, blah, blah. That was Assyria. They've got Jerusalem surrounded. Isaiah's alive. Who else is alive? Hosea's alive at that time. Amos is alive. King Jotham, Amos, Hezekiah. This happens during Hezekiah. But they call down, and it says the angel of death flew over the Assyrian army, and 186,000 bad dog soldiers expired. Dead as dish rags at dawn. Isaiah saw this happen. You read about his calling. I saw also the Lord high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. He talks about the branch. He talks about the virgin shall be with child, and Bethlehem being the place of prophecy of the arrival of the Savior. This is Isaiah, and he just lived during wild days. Jeremiah, they called him the weeping prophet. He was so sad. He wrote Lamentations. He's about a century later, and Jerusalem is about ready to get overtaken by Babylon. So Assyria conquered the north, most of the south. Assyria gets taken up by Babylon. Babylon's in charge. Babylon comes through and takes over Judah, 586 BC. And Jeremiah watches it happen. He warns them all his life. 60 years. You talk about discouragement in ministry. 60 years of warning them, and they say, shut up, you don't know anything. They threw him in a sewer tank, up to here, in mud. Gourmet mud. God, how did this not kill him? Jeremiah is weeping all the time for the godlessness of God's people. And he watches Jerusalem get lambasted, flattened, killed, and hauled away. Daniel and Ezekiel are hauled away. Jeremiah sees it happen. The whole city gets flattened. There he is, waking up after they've all left, and he says, where is this city that was so filled with people? 60 years of ministry, not one convert. Jeremiah could have gone to Babylon for hire and written flowery stuff for the kings and lived like a king in complete luxury. God said, no, you stay here. And we read Jeremiah today because he chose the tough route. He chose obedience. And he inspires people today, 2,600 years later. Jeremiah. I hope you read it. I hope you don't do the Cliff Notes. And find out it says right at the beginning in Jeremiah, it says, and this happened during these kings, and I forgot to tab this. Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah. In the word of the Lord came to him in the 13th year of the reign of Josiah. You'll find Josiah. It happened during 2 Kings 22 through 2 Kings 24. 22, 23, 24. Go and mark that in Kings and mark that here. I showed you that before. During the reign of Josiah, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah, he saw the city fall. What has happened to the city? It was once so full of people. Jeremiah just keeps weeping. Lamentations. Ezekiel. Now, just hear the numbers. 586, you go 20 years about before that, and Babylon made its first trip in and swiped some people away. They took away 2 young people, Ezekiel and Daniel. Ezekiel and Daniel are taken to Babylon as prisoners as 12, 13, 14-year-old boys. Daniel was taken into the palace and served the king. Ezekiel lived on the border closest to Syria and Jerusalem, and Ezekiel wrote his spellbinding, amazing book. Lived not comfortably. God told him to lie on your left side for months. What? Why? Now lie on your right side for months. Now take dung, light it, and cook your dinner over that. Ezekiel's God, all right. Weird stuff. But his book, oh my goodness, Ezekiel 37, the dry bones. Something's going to come to life in the name of God here soon. Ezekiel 38 and 39. Those 2 chapters are the next thing due to happen on the worldwide historical prophecy chart. Are you ready for it? You keep hearing about some religion being the fastest growing religion in the world. Well, God knows what to do about it. He sure does. Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos. Daniel was taken to Babylon as a 13-year-old boy. He's offered to dine with the king. It's a squalid, godless, awful thing that makes Mardi Gras look like Sunday school. And Daddy says, I'm not dining here. I'm not eating that. No, I'm going to leave this entire culture. I'll eat beans and water back at the thing, or just, crushed lentils or whatever. Okay. And Daniel's professionalism and brilliance, and him and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they made the palace people go, whoa, look at these 4 Judean boys. And you know what happened, Daniel, but the prophetic things that he did and saw, the lion's den. People think, oh, the lion's den didn't really happen. Lions weren't really, isn't it really? Well, why'd they take Daniel out? And they threw the perpetrators in the lion's den, and it says the lions crushed all their bones before they hit the floor. People think, oh, that's Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, fiery furnace. Well, it really didn't. I've seen an entire video. Well, they actually fell into a chamber, and it wasn't so hot. Really, it wasn't so hot. Then why did the 7 toughest guards in the entire empire burn to death, putting the guys in the fire? And it says, I threw 3 in there, now there's 4. God is with you. God is with you in a lion's den. He is with you in a fiery furnace. You are safer there with God than you are in a guarded, gated, alarmed, patrolled palace without him. Daniel. Hosea. He's told to order up a bride, and she's a bad girl. And she keeps being a prostitute. And she has other guys' children, and God tells Hosea, stay with her. I want you to know what it feels like trying to love my people. If you're a parent, you know what pain is. You know what because God's kids run away from him. And all parents go, wow, what are my kids doing? You pray for them, they come back later, but you have to walk through some tunnels. Everything that we go through, they go through. Joel, Amos, I'm going to have to kind of skip to the end here. We're in the final 10 minutes. And read Joel, read Amos. Amazing stuff. Beautiful chapters. Obadiah is the shortest book in the Bible. And all it's saying is Edom. Now these are the descendants of Esau. Jacob and Esau. Isaac and Esau. Oh my goodness, I'm blacking out here. Oh well. Yeah. Edom is the descendants of Esau, and they live east, and they see the trouble coming down on Judah, and they're going, ha ha ha! Gonna watch you guys burn. And Obadiah says, Edom, watch your mouth. Guess what? You're next. Remember kind of snickering when your brother or sister got a spanking? You kind of went, and your dad looks at you and says, you're next. That's what's going on with Obadiah. It's totally real stuff. Jonah is told to minister to Nineveh. Jonah did what we would do. Everybody hated Nineveh. Nineveh had piles of skulls right outside their gates. They terrorized the whole world. They were the capital of Assyria. So it's back into 722. You get this rose chart and you'll see how things line up and you'll become fascinated and new. All he's trying to say, hey, even as awful as they are, I'm trying to reach and save them too. By the way, I'm trying to minister to you too, Jonah, with your rotten attitude. And by the way, I can get you anywhere I need you to be. You ever been near a whale? I've been in a very small boat and had a humpback whale go right under me. What if I was swimming? What if they came up to me with a 12-foot wide mouth and treated me like a little dinner mint? Oh my goodness. God will get you where he needs you to get you. And God will do anything. That revival that Jonah kicked off was the biggest revival in the world to date by a reluctant guy with a sorry attitude. And you realize Jonah also evangelized the boat during the storm. He just told his testimony and the whole boat converts. Just tell your story. You have a fantastic story. Just tell it. Jonah can do it. You can do it. Micah says, hey, divine judgment is coming. So is deliverance. And there's a prophecy about Jesus in there. He says, your sin and your destruction is going to lead to restoration, Jerusalem. Samaria too. I'm trying to restore you both. Nahum also prophesies against Nineveh. Habakkuk is talking to God, basically saying, God, Judah is so rebellious. And God says, yeah, well, I'm going to send Babylon. So, you're going to send Babylon? Well, they're even worse. Hey, Babylon's going to get punished too. I know what I'm doing. You ever try to coach God along? And say, God, don't you think you ought to... I have to admit I've been there. God, I can help you out. You seem to be dropping the ball here on this one. Anyhow, Zephaniah, he had such regal status. His theme is the day of the Lord when God punishes. And Judah went, yeah, good. And by the way, Judah, I'm going to punish you too. Yeah, it feels like romper room here. Zephaniah, Haggai. Haggai's name means festal. He says, by the way, Haggai says, your obedience has consequences. Your disobedience has consequences too. And then we have with Zechariah, which means Zechariah, Yahweh, Zechariah, Josiah, Micah, Isaiah, and your last syllable, that's all God there. So Zechariah means the Lord remembers. And he's telling us he keeps his promises. He keeps his covenant. There is deliverance. There is restoration coming. And even more. Because guess what? The Messiah is coming. You guys hang in there. Malachi ends with, in his name means my messenger. God is talking to Malachi about him. And Malachi is just saying a great king will come. He will judge, he will bless, and he will restore. And that is a 55-minute whip through of the Old Testament. Now, I just want to tell you guys, I have read through the Old Testament probably 60 times. Here's this book again. You have a required textbook, and it's a very good one. I haven't met the authors of your textbook there at Wheaton. I know that. I haven't met them. Been to Wheaton, but I haven't met them. I've met some of the faculty at Wheaton, but not those guys. It's good, and I hope you ingest it. I hope you don't go, golly, don't go da and try to get through it quick. Take your time in there. Let that book change you. This book you'll find extremely helpful. There's all kinds of things in it, and again, it's at a big discount right now. This is something that I use, and again, I've had 35,000 volumes. I moved my library like 15 times. It's like 6,000 pounds of books. I about crushed a trailer once. I just thought, I can't do this anymore. This is extremely helpful. It's pedagogical. It's not super complex. It just tells you what you need to know about what God's trying to tell us, and it doesn't get into all the wild extraneous arguments. I'm looking for my Bible bookmarks. Maybe my assistant can hand me a set of those quickly in our last couple minutes. This is something that my wife and I did, and we did this to help you, to simplify things for you. You want to read the Bible, so you start in Genesis 1 on January 1, and you think, well, by December 31st, I'll get to Revelation 20 something or other, and I'm going to read through the Bible this year. How many times have you said that? I started reading through the Bible every year in early 1980s, and my second or third time through, I said, you know something? I need to outline the Bible. I just keep going through it, but this year I'm going to outline it. So that year I outlined it, and that year took 6 years. But I've got a book that explains the whole Bible that I hand wrote. I didn't even have a typewriter at the time. And it's this thick. But you read through the Bible, and then February 9th you get to Leviticus. And you go, oh my goodness, here we go again. And then you quit again. And what my wife and I have done is there's 7 days in the week. Before Moses wrote down the 7 days of the week about creation, nobody knew there was a 7-day week. There wasn't a 7-day week before Moses wrote it down. And people would work 7 days a week. That didn't exist. And that's why everybody died in their 30s back then. The idea of a day of rest comes from God. So we have 7 days in a week, and there's 7 divisions to the Bible. And I'll just tell you, we just have these things, and they're written out, and I'll tell you the website where this is read to you. But these are the 7 divisions of the Bible, and you read through the world on Sunday, the nation on Monday, the wisdom on Tuesday, the prophetic on Wednesday, the exile on Thursday, Christ on Friday, and the church on Saturday, starting in Acts. So you get the birth of the world, the birth of nation, birth of wisdom, the birth of prophecy, which is the fall of Israel, and then the kind of the end of it all. The nation's over. And then the birth of Christ and the birth of the church. And when you read all 7 of those through, seven of those through, each week you start to see how it interrelates like you've never seen before. You realize that the Kings and Chronicles and the prophets are happening at the same time. And you think, oh, I never saw that. We explain it to you. And when we show it to you, you realize that the prophecies in Genesis are happening in Jesus. You realize the things that are happening in Revelation, Daniel talked about 500-something years prior. And you start to see the how it all weaves together, and you go, oh, I get it. So that's when things start getting real exciting. If you like to get read to, like when you were a child, my wife created a website called 7streamsmethod.com, 7streamsmethod.com, and she reads to you from whatever day we're on each day. And I love it when families write us and says, oh, I love your wife's voice. We play it every night, and our kids fall asleep like angels. She has a very soothing voice. She reads it, I don't, because I sound like Vincent Price on the air, and she has a very sultry voice. So I did the commentary for it. And I say, by the way, what we read today was mentioned 300 pages prior in your Bible, so be sure and check both those references. And also note the prophecy that happened in the book of Acts that Joel talks about here. So I just help you. And you'll say, oh, I get it. So anyhow, I want you to know, very soon, you can read through the Old Testament, finish the Old Testament the second, third, eighth time. I've read through the Old Testament about 60 times in a few languages, you can come to the end of the Old Testament and go, wow, I get it. He's bringing us a Savior, isn't he? You bet he is. And that's what's happening in Matthew. We'll talk about it next week because the Savior has landed.